Here we go again.
No, not again.
You've been before.
How long have we been doing this?
Once more unto the
Again until we're both dead.
Hello and welcome. Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk will be hitting theaters on July 21st. And before we get into my movie review for that, I just wanted to give some background information on this because not a lot of people in America know about the true story that goes behind this film. In fact, these events did happen, and these were real men who gave their lives in order to let their fellow countrymen escape capture by the Nazis and fight another day. So without further ado, let's get into the history of Dunkirk, or as I like to say, Dunkirk. It really happened. So Operation Dynamo, or the formal name for the operation to evacuate the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk, happened between May 27th and June 4th of 1940. And by this point, things are not going well for the Allies, obviously. The war officially started when Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, and by that point, the British and the French had started to mobilize their armed forces, and they had formally declared war on Germany when they in September of 39, but nothing actually came of that invasion, and they essentially had been preparing, but they were still kind of lax as to what they were going to do. The French had prepared for an invasion on the Maginot Line, which was a series of fortifications on France's border with Germany, but the Germans knew that they couldn't penetrate the Maginot Line, so they decided to go around the Maginot Line by invading the Netherlands and Belgium, which were technically neutral at the time, but when the German Blitzkrieg happened, the Belgians and the Dutch were overwhelmed, pretty much, and they couldn't do a whole lot. In fact, the Belgian army surrendered on May 28th, which caused a huge gap in the Allied line up by Dunkirk, and British and French forces had to rush into that point in order to keep the Germans out. And in fact, the Germans, their tank forces had gone so fast that they were actually going behind the Allied lines and disrupting their supply chain. So by this point, the French and British were in really rough shape, and the order was given to evacuate to Dunkirk, to retreat to Dunkirk in preparing for evacuation. Of course, by this point, the British Expeditionary Force, what was left of it, had been was trapped in a pocket with the Germans on all sides, and the French were there to hold the perimeter. And the Germans made a lot of great propaganda, as shown in the trailers for Dunkirk, that in fact that they were surrounded and they were closing in. But Hitler actually ordered his panzer armies to halt around this time because they had actually gone so fast that their supply lines were stretched so thin, and a lot of their tanks were breaking down because of this fast pace. Only about a third of the tanks were operational by this point, and Hitler wanted to build up his strength again and hit the British and French with all that they got. Which if that had happened, then then the British and the French probably would have been overwhelmed. But thankfully for them, Hermann Goering, who was the head of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, he persuaded Hitler that he could destroy the British on the beaches with air power alone. Which, in fact, they were very effective at killing the soldiers, and in fact, they had bombed the harbors at Dunkirk. So they were effective to a certain point, but they were not going to be able to defeat them with air power alone. But of course, this caused problems for the British because what Royal Navy ships were available to assist with the evacuation, because the harbors were destroyed, they had to be able to get up really close to to the beaches. The men had to be evacuated on beaches, off the beaches themselves, rather than on docks. And the big destroyers couldn't exactly get that close to the beaches. So when Operation Dynamo happened, all of the British civilian fishing fleets and personal boats were mobilized in order to ferry men off of the beaches and take them to the destroyers. And a lot of these ships were torpedoed from the air with men still on them, killing men by drowning them or, again, stranding them on the beaches. And all this, while this is happening, the French forces that are trapped in the pocket are holding the perimeter. They're fighting with all they got, but only British soldiers, for the most part, are being allowed onto these ships. So that's causing a lot of animosity between the British and the French. But nevertheless, throughout all of this, throughout this 7-day period, the British are able to evacuate the majority of their British Expeditionary Force, total of 338,000 men, as well as a fair number of French personnel as well. The downside of this is that the British had to abandon a lot of their armaments on the beaches. All of their tanks, their trucks, their artillery, their rifles even were left on the beaches. So they got the men out, but they left all of their armaments behind, and the British Army was essentially left weaponless. Also, all during this time, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, was trying to keep the German Air Force off of their the evacuation ships, but Churchill had previously said that he's trying to keep as many Royal Air Force planes at home as possible in preparation for the eventual assault on Britain. And of course, that will be very crucial later on in the Battle of Britain. But then, of course, what happens. There were some fighter support at the time, but there could have been much more, and the soldiers definitely paid the price for that lack of air cover. But of course, from this lack of the fact that the British Army had to leave all of its armaments on the beach was actually a blessing in disguise, because a lot of that armament was left over from the First World War a good 20 years earlier, and it was out of date. And by this, the British Army, while it did take some time to rearm them, they were now being rearmed with modern weapons and tanks and artillery and rifles. And so when they finally started to fight back with their campaigns in North Africa, then they had more modern weapons with which to combat the Germans. So with that in mind, that's the basic background that you have for before going in to see Dunkirk. I hope that everyone takes a moment to recognize that these were real men who gave their lives on the beaches, and these were very very hard conditions that no matter what you see in the main feature film itself, it doesn't come close to conveying what actually these men went through during that time. So there you have it. There's some historical background for this, and I hope you enjoy seeing Dunkirk on July 21st or sometime after that. I know I will, and I will look for my written review and You've Seen It Before movie review. So thank you for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I get. And just remember, there's nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before. So until next time, thank you for watching.